call to order the June 17, 2020 meeting of the Lake Bluff PCZBA. I'll read a prefatory statement. Pursuant to recently adopted amendments to the Illinois Open Meetings Act, included in Public Act 101-0640, public bodies may, in circumstances, hold entirely virtual public meetings without a quorum physically present in any one location. On March 18, 2020, Village President Kathleen O'Hara issued a declaration of emergency pursuant to the authority granted by the Village Code, the Illinois Municipal Code, and the Illinois Emergency Management Agency Act to address the health threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. On May 29, 2020, Governor Pritzker issued a disaster proclamation that declared in-person attendance at public meetings of more than 10 people at the regular public meeting location to be infeasible in accordance with the Open Meetings Act as amended by Public Act 101-0640. On June 16, 2020, Village President O'Hara executed a written determination that given the ongoing emergency associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, in-person meetings of the Village Board are not practical or prudent at this time and until further notice. In accordance with the Governor's disaster proclamation and the Village's President's declaration of emergency and determination regarding meetings of the Village Board, I, as Chair of the Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, hereby determine that in-person meetings of the Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals are not practical or prudent at this time and until further notice. Therefore, we will proceed with the virtual meeting as scheduled. Could I have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Member Burns. Member Russell. George, you are muted if you're trying to talk to us.
Present.
Member Miller.
Present.
Member Danley.
Here.
Member Murray, are you with us?
I am.
Okay. And then Member Ryder.
Here.
And of course, Chair Peters.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you.
Chair Peters, if I may for a second.
Certainly.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of put all that into English, the explanation behind the long statement that Chair Peters just read. You may have heard, and if not, it's okay. It's pretty obscure, but the General Assembly adopted an amendment to the Open Meetings Act. So the Open Meetings Act generally requires us to have a quorum physically present to conduct meetings. And while in the past we've had members who've attended for particular reasons virtually, it's always been one or two members, but we always had a majority of the body, a quorum of the body at Village Hall. That is the general rule. And because of COVID, the General Assembly created a new amendment. And that amendment allows for virtual meetings just like this, so long as the chair of the body, Chair Peters, makes a determination that it is not prudent and safe for us to all meet together at Village Hall. So that statement that you just heard read was that determination. So now we can proceed legally with this meeting. The other part of that amendment that you should all be aware of, because it may affect us going forward, is that in order for us to meet virtually, we still have to have either one member of the PCZBA present at Village Hall or the Chief Administrative Officer, the staff officer at Village Hall in case somebody shows up physically and wants to participate from the Village boardroom. So at the moment, Chair Peters is the designated survivor, so to speak. He's the one who is at Village Hall this evening in case somebody is present. And if anybody is present, they will have an opportunity to speak, both as part of any public hearing, but as well as for public comment. So that's kind of what's going on and how we can conduct this meeting. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about the virtual meeting and the legal framework in which we're operating under now. I'm happy to answer them if anybody has questions.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity, Mr. Schuster.
Yeah.
Very much appreciated. Hearing no questions, let's proceed to non-agenda item number 2. The Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals allocates 15 minutes during each meeting to allow individuals the opportunity to address the board on any matter not listed on the agenda. We limit that discussion to 3 minutes, but in that there are no individuals physically present and no individuals that I believe have requested to speak, we won't have to address this particular item today.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, if I could. So by way of introduction, just to make sure everyone knows, and we'll keep repeating this, if you're joining us and there are 7 people joining us virtually, you have a few ways to indicate that you'd like to speak. If you're on Zoom, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. You can hit that and ask to be recognized. If you're on the phone, you can dial *9 or 9er, and that'll indicate to us that you'd like to speak. Or finally, if you're not doing either of these things, if you're watching at home on Comcast or something like that, if you email us, vlb@lakebluff.org, so Village of Lake Bluff, those initials at lakebluff.org, we're monitoring that and we'll read those aloud as those may come in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole. All right, agenda item number 3, consideration of the February 19, 2020 PCZBA regular meeting minutes. Have the commissioners all had an opportunity to review those draft minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Any recommended changes or other items for discussion?
Yeah, I do have a couple. Page 2 of the minutes, second paragraph, there's a statement that says country estate zoning typically allows 1 unit per 2.2 acres. And I'm sure that that was 4.5 acres. That must have been said.
I believe that was referring to, I'll have to go double check. That might have been referring to the density with a PUD in place. But yes, we will correct
Well, even
that.
with the PUD, it's 2.2 is way low. So that should be fixed. Third paragraph of the same second page, the 5th line, there's a statement presents a project which has never be achieved, should be never been achieved. Page 3, second paragraph, there's a couple references to a Mike Black, and that should be Mike Bleck, B-L-E-C-K. Page 7 of the minutes, 5th line from the bottom, there's a line that says sound attuning, and I'm sure that's supposed to be sound attenuating.
We prefer perfect harmony here in Lake Bluff.
And then page 12 of the minutes, the second and third line from the top, you've got Mickey Collins referring to the 5-story hotel as being in the present tense, and that should be corrected to say was, not is. That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Russell.
I've got a couple comments. I wasn't at the meeting, so I can't comment on the particular content, but I did notice that on page 8, second paragraph, given that I wasn't there, it would be hard for me to make a motion to recommend the village board. So I don't know what the correction should be, but I don't think it was me. And then the same is true on page 9, second paragraph. I wasn't there to make a motion to recommend. So you might want to recheck the video or audio.
Yes, that is quite interesting now that you mentioned that. Thank you.
All right. Any other proposed changes? Hearing none, could we have a motion to approve?
No motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Do we need a roll call, Glenn, or can we just go all in favor, say aye?
We will need a roll call, so one of the details of this new authorization from the General Assembly, all motions will have to be by roll call. So with that said, Member Burns,
Aye.
Member Russell,
I'm going to abstain because I wasn't there.
Member Miller, Member Danley,
Aye.
Member Murray,
Aye.
Member Ryder,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, agenda item number 8, or number 4, I should say. Public hearing, 709 Sheridan Road, residential bulk variations. Mr. Cole, if you could provide us with an overview, please.
Certainly. So in this particular case, it is a lot of variations for what is, I think, a fairly simple request. So this is an existing non-conforming structure on Sheridan Road in the village's R4 residential district. So this district is made for single-family residences. The existing structure is on the first floor. It's built almost corner to corner in the lot, except for a small front parking area. The first floor is all used for a non-conforming commercial use, and then the second floor is a small residential apartment, if you would. But our view is that that's a single-family residential use. That's the conforming part of what's on the structure, or what the structure is used for, what that land is used for. What they're proposing to do is build an addition, essentially to work as a master suite, a new master bathroom and bedroom onto that existing, let's call it an apartment if you would, but that living area or living suite. And so the variations necessary are fairly simple. Because it's built essentially lot line to lot line, it will require a floor area ratio variation because it's already over floor area as it is, and this would add an extra 590 square feet or so to floor area. It would take 2 forms of side yard setback relief, again, because this construction would happen within that side yard on the northern properties or from the northern properties. And then the daylight plane, because this is already 1 story tall at the lot line and penetrates the daylight plane forward of this addition, west of this addition, you would have to provide a variation to continue that same roof line further back into the structure. Specifically, if you're looking through the plan sheets, the perspective pages towards the back, I think, do a good job of illustrating the relief sought, and especially how that interacts with the daylight plane. I will note again that the variation is a little interesting in that there is that non-conforming use on the first floor. I'll also note that the village's comprehensive plan anticipates that eventually this would be a open space use, that this would be a continuation of the green belt going north and south on Sheridan Road. You can choose to consider that if you like to. By no means, would granting the variation. You can grant it, or because despite these reasons, or you can choose not to grant it because of these reasons if you wanted to. We think it's important to note, but it's not entirely in conflict with those. There's no change in use proposed, I should say, and so you don't have to consider at this time how this continuation of that use interacts with that. I think that is it from the staff report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cole. Do we have a petitioner tonight, or can we proceed without a formal petition?
We do have a petitioner tonight, and I will bring her into Hollywood Squares, as it were. So it'll take just 1 second for her to get her audio and video going.
Thank you. Yes, if you could state your name for the record, please, and your residence.
Grace Ragsdale Janda, 709 Sheridan Road, Lake Bluff, Illinois. And
709 Sheridan Road, Lake Bluff, Illinois.
Thank you. And you're before the commission today on a petition seeking several variances. If you could proceed through the worksheet that you submitted, that would be much appreciated, going through the items that have to be addressed for the variance.
Sure. So the first one being practical difficulty or hardship. The building is obviously already non-compliant in all of these ways. So getting it compliant is virtually impossible for us. So there is quite a practical difficulty or hardship in complying. It's just not possible under the circumstances of the building that we've bought here. Unique physical condition would be those circumstances. The building takes up the entire lot line. So that is fairly unique physical condition for being in the zoning that we're in. And also being the mixed use commercial residential. However, the proposed change does not affect either of the existing conditions. So this is just related to the residential use, which we're trying to make more residential.
We're expecting an addition to our family, and it's a 2-bedroom right now, and our daughter stays with us through the summers. It's kind of impossible, so we're very limited. So we're asking the board's permission or blessings to move forward on this project. We're just trying to invest in the space and in the community. Ragsdale's been a long-standing face in the community for a long time, and we plan on staying here and raising our family here. And you know, we live, work, and play out of the same place, and that's kind of where we're at with it.
So all of those and in terms of special privilege, I don't think we're asking for any special privilege, just a expansion of what we already use as living space outdoors, but wanting to make that enclosed for year-round use. And about code purpose, as the building and lot is zoned residential, we're actually creating an enhanced use toward the extent of the zoning. So there's no expansion of the commercial entity related to this request. And then for public health and safety, there's already a small gap in the structure between the apartment and the barrel truss roof. That's outdoor patio space. And it currently has a garden lattice with ivy growing all the way across it. So we don't feel that the change we're proposing is really creating any change to anyone around us in terms of what they can see with the building. It will just be a brick wall instead of an ivy wall. And we intended to be on the north side because of having Washington Park on the south side, and that being the most visible part of our structure. Knowing with the green belt, wanting to keep that open green space, we thought it was less impactful to have the structure on the north end where it wouldn't be seen from the street in the park. And just being one baby, so we're not really adding any impact. More parking needs, at least for 16, 17 years. And I guess that's all the points. So,
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll open it up to discussion from the commissioners. I don't know if we want to go down a roster, if we could just go one by one, but whoever wants to start, feel free.
Chair Peters,
Yes,
Member Russell here. Are there any other people from the village that are calling in to speak?
Sure. So we do have some others here. I'll go through the instructions again. I will say we did, in addition to the materials provided in your packet, we did get a letter a little earlier today from Barton Hebert. I'll just read it aloud. To whom it may concern, I'm a resident of 19 East Washington and Lake Bluff and have reviewed the proposed plan at 709 Sheridan. I see no issue with the addition physically or aesthetically to the neighborhood. Thank you for your consideration, Barton T. Hebert, 19 East Washington, Lake Bluff. So again, if you're joining us and you'd like to chime in, if you're on Zoom, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom and just ask to be recognized. If you're on the phone, you can dial *9, again, *9, and that'll indicate to us that you'd like to talk. We'll give it a few seconds in case anyone, and we do have someone. So if your phone ends in 6928, I'll turn you on right now and just make sure to state your name and address for the record.
Hi, this is Candace. I own the building to the north of the building we're discussing at 713 Sheridan Road. And I've moved back Monday. I moved in. And I was really aware of the zoning issues with all the non-compliance. And I'm most concerned about the light. As the building stands now, I lose all light at 3 p.m. in my backyard, as their residence blocks the sun. If the building goes up farther into my side, into my backyard, I will lose a lot more sun, and feel very hemmed in. Because it's on Sheridan and it's across from the train, the front yard is really quite unusable because of the noise and the traffic. So my backyard is an oasis that I'm afraid will go away if that building goes up.
so you're immediately to the north.
Correct. I'm at 713. And they just, I think they said they were building on the north because they didn't want to impact Washington Park. But I think if they build on the north and go back farther into my yard, they're going to negatively impact me.
This helps illustrate. This is the, turn this on real quick. So this, of course, is the Ragsdale property, and then this is the property we're discussing right here.
What are the dimensions of the backyard that might be adversely impacted?
During the day, their brick building, the way it stands, shades 10 feet of my yard on their side. I have no idea. I didn't measure it out how much it would be impacted, but if their living quarters takes all the sun out of the side of my house at 3 o'clock without the addition, I have no idea how it will impact it. Plus, it'll feel like I'm living in the middle of a downtown city. And I have no idea if there are windows going in on that side. Will I lose all my privacy?
Will there be windows on that side of the proposed structure?
No, sir. Not that I believe.
Although
Okay.
there
There
could
could be.
I think the important part to note as you look
If you-
at this diagram or this photo that's up is that where the addition is proposed is adjacent to the house and not adjacent to the backyard.
And the wall to the north there, there's been, so the whole building is covered in ivy. And to the wall, to the north there, there's an ivy lattice wall that's been there for 10 years that's completely covered with ivy. So it'll literally represent exactly what it is we're asking to do. It's just the lattice will come down and a structural wall will go up, and the ivy will grow right back over it, and it'll look exact same way it does currently.
The current plan is to put 2 skylights on that room on the north so that there's no windows facing on the north side. So it would be an extension of the existing brick wall that has no windows on that side right now. It would just be an extension of that over.
Oh, okay.
So that barrel truss right there, that's the part that is adjacent to the backyard.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll open it up to questions from the commissioners. Maybe we'll start with Member Burns.
Sure. Thank you for your presentation. I know you mentioned putting it on the south side to enable maybe a transition from the green space. I think I said south side, north side, to enable a transition from that green space to the south. Would it cause bigger kind of renovation issues if you did put it on the south side? I mean, I'd like to hear how the other members on the board feel about that as it relates to a transition, but it would not be as impactful to the daylight plane for your neighbor to the north.
It would be much more in-depth and difficult endeavor for us to put it on the south side, just in terms of where plumbing is and in terms of electrical and all of that. So in terms of how the building is laid out right now, it is easier, least path of resistance, because the existing bathroom is there on the north end right now. So we would just be able to work right off of that versus there's no plumbing in place on that south end. So it would be definitely a more difficult project.
Okay. And how tall is the ivy wall right now?
It's the same height as the
Well, I think it would be 18 inches. It's 18 inches or 2 feet under the current roof line.
Okay, so it's going to be, the wall that you're proposing is approximately 18 inches to 2 feet taller than the current ivy line.
Right.
10 feet versus 8.5 feet or something like that.
And if I were to measure from the deck to the top of the ivy, it'd probably be 8 feet. Because we step down on the parapet. The drawings show carrying the roof line all the way across, which we really don't have to. That would put 10-foot, I want to say 10-foot ceilings in the addition, which I would settle for 8. I just need a structure.
So it goes from the existing brick wall is at 9 foot 8 inches, and then with the roof slope where it would end closest to the barrel truss, it would be at 8 feet. So at that lowest point of the proposed new wall is about the height that it's at now.
I see. Okay, so only where it meets up with the existing house, and the roof slopes to the east then.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and then so it goes up another foot and 7 inches.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that was my questions for now.
Thank you, Member Burns. Member Damley.
That was, so right now with the daylight plane, I was just worried about if it's already having that impact with the screen. So you're saying 1'7" difference. You would carry the ivy going up. My big question was flipping it to the other side, but you already answered that question about the hardship with the existing plumbing and the electrical. I understand that. Obviously, we're concerned with the neighbors and daylight plane here. but I feel like the rest of it has very minimal impact in that you're not stretching the home east, west, north, south. You're really just raising it 1.7 feet. So I think I'm clear and don't really have any questions at this moment, other than thinking if there was if you've exhausted every other idea in regards to giving yourself some additional square footage, but you answered that question.
Thank you, Member Danley. Member Miller.
I didn't quite understand, is the roof gonna slope down against the wall that's there now?
Correct. So we have to have a pitch on that roof, so it will
Right.
go on the existing flat roof pitched toward the barrel truss.
So how far up above the current wall it's gonna, is it 1.7 feet?
Yes, sir. And it will
At the
go from
highest
west
point.
to east.
The highest point,
Highest
Yeah.
point being on the west, lowest point being to the east.
right, and that's going to be a 10-foot ceiling?
Would have to look at what the current height is. What did you say it was just now?
9.8.
9'8", and it'll be sloping down to 8 foot.
Okay, and what's the current code for ceilings, 8 feet? Glenn?
I'd have to look real quick. Give me just a moment. While I'm doing that, this helps clarify. That's a pretty good view.
Thank you, Glenn.
I see. So the 10-foot ceilings are in the rest of the house then, correct?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I see. All right, so I was gonna say, if you drop down to 8 feet, the light plane wouldn't be it's not that dramatic as it is now, so, all right, I'm satisfied.
Thank you, Member Miller. Member Murray.
I think Member Danley's questions were focused in a similar way. This seems to be a pre-existing mixed-use building, and I think that there's a lot of weight we need to give to the light cone issue, but the reality is that I think that this is extending a consistent fashion, a pre-existing condition. So I don't have any further questions to ask.
Thank you, Member Murray. Member Russell.
Yep. In reference to the FAR variation, I don't have any concern with that at all, because I would think that almost all commercial structures in the downtown area of the village probably violate the FAR by over 100% or more already. So that doesn't concern me, but the building of this brick wall, extending the brick wall on the north property line, does regretfully concern me considerably. The purpose of zoning is to protect the adjacent properties. And I understand this is an older building. It's been there a long time, and perhaps that house next door was built after the structure was built, but I'm struggling mightily with being able to recommend approval of this with the construction of that brick wall, because it is a long-lasting, permanent imposition on the adjacent property. It extends a wall that is right on the property line. That's going to be about 20 feet high, 20 feet in depth. But when you were working with your architect, Grace, did you explore the possibility of shifting the bedroom, the new master suite, not all the way to the other side, but just to move it in about 8 feet? I would think you could almost have the exact same functional layout that you're striving for, as opposed to shifting it all the way to the other side. What would be wrong with shifting this addition about 8 feet towards the center of the building?
So the only issue with that is that the living room opens up onto the patio space. So that would cut into the access, the sliding glass door and windows that are there. They're set right in the middle of the apartment. So there's only a certain amount of space we have to go from that access point north. And it would just make for a very, very, very small room and bathroom if we had to do that. We did look at an option of setting it back, I believe it was 4 feet from that wall so that we could have a little bit more of a setback. And that would be an option, as well as a modification, possibly to the roof line there, a sloping, so that we could minimize the impact.
What about glass?
What's that about glass?
He was just saying glass, that would be
Instead
another
of
option
being a
to us.
brick
But
wall there, what about if we were to make that wall glass? The ivy grows over it anyways. If we were, instead of doing a brick wall, put just glass panes across to allow the light, and we can do the 4 to 8 feet of the bedroom. So that end of the addition would basically be a glass structure to allow the light plane to travel through the addition and hit the neighbor's home.
Okay, I think I understand what you're describing. You're talking about even then a portion of the roof would be glass?
Yeah, it would just have a ledger board, but that whole corner would be open. It would all be glass to allow the light plane to go through. So I would do like commercial windows. They wouldn't open. It would just be glass all the way across. And then I would have the roof be tempered glass as well for that portion. And so basically my bathroom, the ceiling and the one wall would be glass, but that whole area is privacy anyways. The ivy creates a whole wall of privacy. And that whole side of the building is covered with it.
Mr. Cole, could you put up the floor plan? I don't have the hard copy to look at. The floor plan
Certainly.
of the addition. for a
Yeah, and
moment.
I was actually just marking out this dimension here is approximately 8 feet, if that helps you visualize your prior question, Member Russell.
Because I don't, with the bath, there's a bathroom, a bathtub there, and a toilet. I'm not on your north wall of your proposed addition. I'm not understanding the comment about the glass wall.
It would sit on top of the existing brick structure. So it comes up 4 feet currently. Our roof line is lower than the brick wall. So really we're proposing just to come up with the brick wall only, I would say 5 to 6 feet. We're not building up 10 feet of brick. We currently have, I don't want to speculate, but I want to say it's 5 feet of brick, 4 feet of brick. It comes up chest high. So the glass would sit from chest high to the current height.
Okay, well, it would seem to me that from a functional standpoint, you'll end up blocking a lot of that upper glass anyway. That's just my opinion. But I guess just to wrap it up, if the addition, and believe me, I am torn over this because I don't like to turn people down that want to preserve existing structures with a family like yours that has been invested in the community a long time. But I really think that the way to go, at least to get my recommendation, is that you shift that whole unit over about 8 feet. I think you've still got enough access from the living room. Yes, you have to relocate the sliding door maybe, but what you're talking about spending for all this glass, moving that door over wouldn't cost a fraction of that cost. So I just want to let you know that if there's a recommendation to approve as is, I have to vote no. And I really think that and I know it cuts into your patio space where you want all that extra sun, but to put a brick wall right on the property line, adjacent to this next door property, I just cannot do that. Zoning is here to protect the neighbors, and I can't vote for it, given to me that there seems to be a feasible alternative. I'm done.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Certainly.
So two comments and perhaps a suggestion. The first comment is that Ms. Queenie has asked to speak again. Would you like to recognize her? Member Miller, to your question, I'd have to research a little bit more to know what the exact height requirement is here. If this was a single family house, which this isn't, but if it was, the minimum height of the ceiling would be 7 feet in most areas. It would go down to 6 feet 8 inches in bathrooms and laundry rooms. And there's some special considerations around slope ceilings. But so you're at 8 feet's a regular ceiling height, moving towards a low ceiling height. A suggestion I would make, if it helps your deliberations, is so right now, and I'll share to help illustrate. So right now, of course, you have this outdoor patio, and there's this ivy wall, and if I understand it right, Mr. and Mrs. Jana, this is a solid wall, right? I mean, you can't see over it, you can't see through it.
Correct.
Correct. The brick goes up, we think 5 feet right now.
Yeah, the brick comes up about 4.5, 5 feet to your chest. And then from there, it's ivy for another 4 feet. So that the ivy from the lowest point to the deck to the ivy is probably 8 feet, 9 feet. Yes. And the building to the roof line probably stands 11 feet because the apartment ceilings are 10 and you have a 12-inch attic space.
Okay. So if you're standing here on this corner, can you see down into this backyard then, or is your view completely blocked by this wall?
You can see down into the backyard. I mean, you stand on your tippy toes, you can look into the backyard.
Okay. I'm not sure if it helps your deliberations. What I would suggest is, breaking into the daylight plane here with that brick wall. Of course, it may be seen as an imposition, as Member Russell said. Potentially, you do gain privacy if you think about it that way, and that there's no more chance for someone to see into that backyard anymore. A condition of approval could be just that wall not have any windows built on it. We can put that into the ordinance to make sure that adjacent property wall, as it wraps around, and I'll show it here. If you were to recommend approval, we could condition it that this wall here and this wall here not be constructed with windows at this point or at any point. So the light in the bathroom would stay at these two skylights, and then you would know for sure. I deferred to the adjacent property owner how well received it would be, but you would know that you'd never have to be in your backyard and worry about someone being able to see you from an adjacent property. So that would conclude my suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Excuse me a second. If you lowered the ceiling to 8 feet, how much of an imposition is it on the property next door then, rather than 10 feet?
That would be about 3 feet more than it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than 5 feet is what you're planning. And you said you'd be willing to lower the ceiling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And my understanding from the picture, it doesn't look like it extends any further into the backyard. It just goes as close as far as the building line that I can see.
Yes. Sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Member Miller. Ms. Queenie, did you have further comment?
Two things. Yes, there are two things. That ivy is not present all year long. So their little wooden trellis thing is not a brick wall. So the sun is coming into my yard the majority of the year. How much sun will I lose in my yard if there's a brick wall going up from the large brick wall that's already in existence?
Has there been any sort of daylight plane impact analysis conducted, Mr. Cole?
No, sir.
Is that something that we can do as a village, or does that require outside expertise?
In this particular case, I think you would ask the applicant's architect to perform that for you. Again, it's not entirely common, but I think a licensed architect would be able to produce something representative.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask a question? And I don't know, I apologize whether I'm directing it to the petitioner or to Mr. Cole. But when you perform such analysis, it strikes me that the question is, what's the incremental reduction in light from this structure? It strikes me that, the existing structure is to the south, and we've talked a lot about southern light and how important it is here. And so I don't want to dismiss those issues. Those are real important factors. My question is, what do these changes do incrementally to southern light, given that is already pretty significantly compromised by the already existing structure to the south? That's question number one that I'd like to understand more. And then I think the second question is, it seems like the neighbor, and my apologies for not using proper names, but the neighbor to the north had real concerns about light impact on the backyard. It seems like there's a bit of a differential impact here between the side yard, if you will, between the two structures and the backyard itself, which I don't see as much incursion of the new structure into the light cone of the backyard. But those are just based on very, very cursory review of the drawings that we have right now. So I'd throw those out there as questions. I don't know if they're soluble this evening.
Thank you, Member Murray.
So certainly to reply briefly, again, a comment here and a more general comment. One would be, in this case, you're talking about an 18 or 19 feet wide, again, depending on how you weigh the existing brick or trellis structure, 8 to 9 feet tall, new surface that's blocking light. That's probably not terrible trigonometry or geometry to figure out, but I confess I don't know it off the top of my head. Again, I think an architect could produce that for you if you wanted to do a continuation and request that. There are other communities on the North Shore that may ask for that under these circumstances, and so I don't think it's entirely improper. What I would suggest you consider going forward is, as you've said, these questions have come up more frequently. It's possible to look at requiring these studies to be submitted in advance for certain types of variations, if that's something as a separate conversation this group is interested in exploring. That might be something to consider.
I mean, just to respond to that, one of the concerns that I think we've all talked about at previous meetings is the cost that we impose on applicants for what should be relatively straightforward questions. While I know that in certain circumstances, what our kind of pro forma response here would be is to request a light study and then, postpone action on the issue. What I would ask is, are we in a situation where there probably is some marginal impact on the side yard light cone, but it just doesn't look like the backyard is going to be impacted here? And is it a reasonable imposition on the petitioner to require incremental expense and study to an architect or other group that is willing to perform this light cone study? Or is there a sense of the PCZBA that, the requested variations are acceptable as they stand today? And I don't want to get into a knee-jerk reaction where we require more cost for a standard application. And I worry that going where you just said, Mr. Cole, which I understand the point, and it's a good one, is just, it's effectively a tax on any applicant to evaluate light cone. So I just throw that out as I don't want to default into more expense for a simple application.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Murray. Petitioners have discussed possibly decreasing the height of the wall. How feasible is that? If you're at 9 feet now, dropping it down to 8 feet or 7.5 feet at that point. Is that feasible?
Yeah, we could definitely
think so.
adjust the plan for that. And keep in mind, there already is a brick wall there that's at 5 feet. So we're not talking about adding 9 feet. We're talking about adding
4 feet.
4 feet. So we could reduce that to adding 2, 3 feet, you know, wherever we need to fall for everybody to be happy. But I think that's important to note is that that's already at 5 feet. So we're not asking to add 9
9
feet.
feet of brick wall. We're
Yeah.
just asking to add 4 feet, 5 feet tops, and we would be able to function with that, and everything would be great.
I guess there might be some architectural impact then along that wall because the heights would be disparate, as I understand it.
The main existing roof would then have to fall onto the small roof with a short gutter, and then the water would then go back and be pitched to the barrel truss, and we would catch all the water and it go off the building as it does now.
My initial reaction, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, is whether or not the potential impact with the 4-foot increase in height would be de minimis, or whether or not it would be marginal, so to speak. And I really can't comment on that, but I just wonder whether or not during most times of year, the impact may be marginal or de minimis.
Mr. Chairman, my view is I think the impact is marginal. I mean, I think at a certain point, this body has to basically not keep relying on incremental expense and expert opinions. And I look at this building as a pre-existing mixed-use building. And is there a light condition to the north of this building? Yes. Is it materially impacted by the changes that a young family are trying to make in order to, you know, expand their living space and stay here in the village, which is something that we talk a lot about wanting to create family-friendly spaces and different types of spaces. I actually think that looks like a really beautiful place. And, you know, my view is that asking these folks to go away and conduct a study is somewhat disingenuous. Either we're going to allow the violation of the light plane, which clearly exists, or not. And I think we owe this couple guidance before they go incurring additional expense.
Well, we could certainly, if somebody wants to make a motion, we could certainly put it out for a formal vote. If the petition, well, in this case, we're a recommending body. So the matter, if it's successful, goes to the village council for formal review and decision. But if the consensus is to proceed with a formal motion, we can certainly proceed.
I'm interested in making a motion to recommend the proposal as written with the condition that the wall on the north and the wall on the east would not include windows.
That's fair.
I'd second that motion.
I'd like to add to try to make it a little better for the neighbor that we have the minimum height for ceilings that is allowable by code as well to limit the height of that roof.
I would amend my second to include that proposal as well.
Any further discussion on that? All right, could I have a roll call vote, please?
Certainly. So as is our custom on substantive motions, the order is random, chairs at the end, so listen carefully. Member Danley,
Yes.
Member Ryder,
Yes.
Member Miller,
Yes.
Member Burns,
Yes.
Member Russell,
No.
Member Murray,
Yes.
Chair Peters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
By a vote of 6-1.
If you could give the petitioner a brief overview as to possible next steps, Mr. Cole.
Certainly. So this should go, as was mentioned, the Plan Commission is a recommending body on this item. The village board gives final approval. So their next meeting will be Monday, June 22nd at 7 p.m. If you let me know that when you're in attendance, we'll be usually, for when applicants are present, we try to move those items up towards the front of the agenda. But they'll do a first reading, so they'll discuss your matter. They'll take a vote, but they won't pass it. At their next meeting, which is July 13th, they'll take a formal action to adopt that and to grant you your relief. I think you'll recall earlier today we talked about, if you would, would you consider submitting building plans or directing those to be drawn up? Again, nothing's for sure until July 13th. Many people choose to start that work after first reading at your risk. So if you have any questions, of course, you know how to contact us.
Thank you
Thank
so
you all
much.
very, very
Thank you,
much.
board.
Yeah,
Thank
may I make one other comment, Chair Peters?
Certainly.
Could we possibly ask the petitioner to ask their architect to, before the presentation on Monday, for the benefit of the village board members, to try and get some decent drawings of that north wall? Because clearly that 5-foot-high brick wall or whatever it is, I don't think there was one member of the zoning board that knew it was here. Not a very good job by the architect, in my opinion.
Okay. We'll get that clear before the next meeting. We apologize.
Thank you very much. Okay. Agenda item number 5, public hearing 28-38 East Center and 53-91 East Scranton Avenue. Relief for restaurant uses, special use permits, variations, etc. Mr. Cole, if you could give the commission a brief overview, please.
Certainly. So early comment up top. This is an example, I hope, of an item that is relatively, we're really only doing simple to understand things, but we're doing a lot of them. And so perhaps we have created complexity in that way. I'll say up front that we've been working pretty closely with John DeRossier and the folks at Rev Cycles with their team to try and make something that responds, a reasonable recommendation that responds to their needs now and that tries to be future looking, tries to give them, tries to address those situations we can foresee going into the future. With that said, because there are many simple things, this is one of those few times that I've given you a PowerPoint. I'm not fond of PowerPoints. I hope you'll bear with me. I hope it helps add clarity rather than take it away. So, and it's still a pretty short one. So what Innovasi, what John DeRossi and his team has requested is essentially 3 things. The first would be that they can relocate Bonk from an existing tenant space to an adjacent one. So when this came through the first time, to keep things simple rather than dive into all of the different approvals this property has had over time, we just issued a special use permit to that one particular space, to the site plan shown, anticipating that would meet their needs. Now, as part of changes to the tenant mix in the building, they're proposing to move the bike shop, and so by extension, that Bonk, the sandwich takeout fast casual concept, to a different space, which takes zoning relief. The second part that they're looking at is in part because of, I believe, of COVID-19. I'm sure John Mr. DeRossier can tell you a bit more when he presents, is converting part of the dining space in Innovasi to a retail area for the sale of liquor. So instead of just perhaps buying a bottle of wine on your way in or into or out of the restaurant, you'd be able to go in just to purchase wine to consume off premises, perhaps food off premises. Again, sort of this blended retail component that fits into their restaurant that is a different type of liquor establishment in the downtown. And then finally, in some view, the biggest change, for some time there has been, since this building was built in 2003, there has been a basement that's historically been used. It was anticipated perhaps to be a catering kitchen or a guest kitchen for cooking classes, things like that. They're proposing to turn part of that space into a basement bar called, I'm not sure if it's Cash or Cache. I'll leave that to Mr. DeRosier, which one is trendy. But to seat 30 to 35 people down there in what is a drinking appetizers type of establishment. To those three requests, we've added a fourth as staff, which is that this property has had something like 18 different approvals over the course of time. We think it's time to go in and clean some of this up, add some clarity. That's mostly an administrative process, but there's a few substantive items I wanted to make sure you are aware of. And to make things simpler, we'll start with those items actually. And these are really just sticking points that have come up with the ordinance and these approvals over time. The first, I apologize, is this idea of what is a restaurant. So as originally approved, Holly's, which was the first restaurant to go into this space, was one large sit-down restaurant, and there was this idea of a second cafe with a lower fare menu, things like that. That, of course, has changed over time. But there's this idea of what is a restaurant? What is a restaurant for a special use? Is it just one entry and exit? Is it multiple? At what point along the line of changing do you have to come back? What we proposed is this idea of dining areas, right? So, and this would apply to the restaurants in this building. So in total, there's Innovasi / the other doors, one restaurant as we've taken it. There's Prairie Espresso, and then there would be Bonk. And so we're proposing that globally to these, you would say, as long as you're not increasing the floor area, as long as you have the same operator, and as long as you're using a common preparation area, a common kitchen, you can call it one restaurant, you can call it 5 restaurants, 5 entries and exits, however much you want to slice and dice that space. As long as those 3 provisions stay the same, you may potentially need a resolution of the village board, but you wouldn't have to come back to this body to go through hearings and legal and things of that nature. It'd be an expedited process. Again, bearing in mind both that we want to try to offer flexibility based on current circumstances, and especially in the world that our restaurateurs face during and after COVID-19. These are permanent decisions. They're not, we don't try to make them for a 1 year or a 2 year type of situation. So I don't want to go too far in the other way either, but again, we're trying to be prospective. The others are more straightforward. Use change, there's this idea in the ordinance that's somewhat loose and in our code that would suggest perhaps that when requests like this come forward that you would have to reauthorize parking variations each time. We plan to make it clear that unless there's a physical change in the building, that isn't necessary. If this group considers special use permits in that building, of course, they'll consider parking as part of them. But certainly we don't want new tenants to come in and require all this expense and hearings and things of that nature for what our use is contemplated under our code. And then finally, as these approvals have gone on, it's hard to know if architectural changes, you could read that potentially as saying that these changes should go to the plan commission. I don't think that was intentional, and certainly I think we would clear up that that's not anticipated, that this group is really only interested in seeing this when, if there were to be an expansion in the building or a change in parking, changes really to that two-dimensional, the actual site plan, rather than things like elevations or materials or signage, things like that. Those are the hard parts. So Innovasi's requests, Bonk, we propose to allow them to relocate into that adjacent tenant space, or again, thinking into the future, other tenant spaces in the building, provided that they stay at that same floor area. Same conditions, they can only be open until 10 p.m. Employees would have to park at the train station to defray parking demand. We'll come back to that. And then this idea that we want this facility to coexist with another permitted use, so that it can't just turn into a full-time restaurant. It's made to complement another use. That use can be the bike shop. It can be anything but a food store. We think a food store is too similar to a restaurant, that you wouldn't want those to coexist without taking a closer look at it again. The next one, this retail area, we're talking about, they'll need liquor licensing changes for this as well. But we think very simple changes designed to make sure that this is an accessory use. So you can't open a freestanding liquor store in the central business district. It has to be, this is allowed because it's accessory and often may be part of a restaurant. And we would intend to allow it subject to 3 very simple conditions. Again, first, this area is limited to the square feet you approve. If it were to be expanded, you have to come back. Second, if Innovasi is reduced, the size of Innovasi and the other door, that whole 4-plate, if that was to shrink, you'd have to shrink the liquor store proportionately also. So let's say Innovasi decides to close up 2/3 of their shop, they still can't be, by reduction, they can't make that liquor store half of their operation. And then finally, we think, consistent with this idea that this is accessory, maybe it has other entrances, maybe you can enter and leave without a meal, but patrons of at least one of these dining areas within the restaurant should just be able to walk over and shop on their way out. They shouldn't have to go out and back in if this is truly an accessory to that restaurant. Perhaps the biggest change, this downstairs bar, cachet, there's another interesting area in the code, which is a drinking place versus an eating place. John's representation at first, I think, consistently has been that this is an eating place, that they'll serve food that still looks like a restaurant. For our viewpoint, it's just, it comes very close to the line of being a drinking place. The distinction is a drinking place may sell food, but it's really in the drinking business. And so we think it makes the most sense to allow it as a drinking place, to understand that it may look like a place that people go to drink and not eat and not do much else. Similar in some ways to what the brewery is now. If the PCZBA were to want to make a different recommendation, we'd say that you would need some guardrails there to make sure that it stays an eating place first. And the simplest way for this business to operate is to not have to worry about those conditions. If they sell a lot of food, great. If they sell a small amount of food, that would be acceptable too. Aside from that nuance, same conditions as in Innovasi. The door's shut at 11 o'clock. The employees have to park in the parking. Which is a good segue into the last item. When we talk about restaurants in the downtown, we always talk about parking and the parking needs in that area. Of course, parking is certainly different now than it was in the past. I can tell you we've sold a whopping 1 daily fee at our train station for the past couple months, which is very different than normal. Usually there are 300 to 400 a month. So COVID, again, makes for strange things. But this table shows you the net effect of getting rid of bonk as it was entitled. Again, theoretically, you reduce spaces, the demand by 7.5. You add about 8.5 spaces back. And so net, it's 0 to 1 spaces. It's a pretty de minimis after you've considered the couple spaces you already added through bonk. What we're proposing to do with this relief is 2 things that could increase that further. First, the way bonk is set up right now, because of plumbing code reasons, they wouldn't be able to have seats in the building. They'd have to be a takeout type of operation. If they should be able, under the plumbing code, to add seats, we would propose that you would allow that without making them come back up to 22, the same as was entitled in the other building. That could potentially add parking demand you don't see. Again, these 2 or 3 stalls coming back. Similarly, that retail space on paper generates less parking demand than the restaurant it's replacing. So again, we recommend that you allow that space to be eliminated without coming back. That, you know, a restaurant is probably a more natural use of that space than a liquor sales area or a food sales area. But again, understand that that happening without this group seeing it could again be another potentially 2 parking spaces. I will note that you know, there are a couple alternatives we have. You can essentially do nothing. You can just move the employees over to the train station parking to address these parking demands. There's also a couple alternatives in the memo we presented, as far as perhaps you would require an Avasi to provide valet at certain times. That was required of Holly's in the past. Or again, perhaps you would you could take a small fee that would help us update a parking study to evaluate in the future parking demands created by this business on this block and elsewhere in the CBD, and try to work on our parking ecosystem. Again, viewing this as a very large reduction from the 12,800 per stall you'd have to use ordinarily if you were just to pay for stalls, parking spaces, instead of providing them. So that was a lot. Again, simple request. We like to think simple recommendations, just a lot of them. I'm happy to answer any questions before we bring up John.
Yeah,
No,
Glenn,
thank you very much. Go ahead.
Glenn, sorry.
No, go ahead, George.
Glenn, early on, you made the comment that the retail area was for wine, but you actually meant liquor and wine, correct?
Sure. So there's some nuance there. From a zoning perspective, I don't think it makes sense to distinguish. I believe the liquor commissioner will recommend that they can sell beer and wine, but not alcoholic spirits as part of their liquor licensing, separate from zoning. Of course, they might sell food or merchandise, other things there as well.
Are they requesting retail for liquor?
For liquor as in spirits?
Yes.
I suppose I'd let John speak to that.
Okay, well, let him comment on that when he starts talking. And then just to clarify for me, aren't all the employees of Innovasi required to park at the train station parking lot now?
That's correct.
Okay. Thought I heard you make a comment about shifting them to the train station parking lot. I know that has historically been a compliance issue, a very aggravating issue that employees are, at least historically, were constantly seen pulling up and parking in downtown parking spaces in violation, and it's just impossible for the village to police that. I don't know if the village attorney can suggest anything clever in this reapproval of this whole package, but boy, it certainly would be nice to get all those employees, or the ones that don't choose to park in the train parking lot over there. It's very frustrating, very frustrating. And then the last item is are the hours that are recommended for nighttime close of business, are they going to match what was recommended for the Lawrence project down the street?
I'll need to pull that one up real quick. I believe they perhaps go longer because there's no Cache doesn't introduce a new outdoor component, which was a concern there. And it's not by those residential condos. But give me just a moment. I'll confirm that for you. I think the village attorney would like to chime in. As a point of interest, I can tell you that Innovasi did purchase 22 parking permits for that train station lot last year, which we think is, those can be shared among employees. So we think that's close. Again, I'll leave it to the village attorney to talk about options a little bit more too.
Glenn, how many current employees are there of the Innovasi group?
Yeah, I would again defer to Mr. DeRossier. In his application, he says that they have approximately 40 to 45.
So I would love to see a breakdown from the Innovasi group of employees and at least a little bit of understanding of how many people are buying Metro passes and coming up on the rails. Parking is a significant issue that is involved here. And I think one area where the application is deficient is supplying the necessary information to really understand the impact on parking here in the central business district.
Member Russell, if I could, perhaps I can chime in at the after Mr. DeRossier has a chance to speak, or after, excuse me, after the village attorney has a chance to speak.
Anytime.
Yeah, so so in terms of options on how to enforce the parking regulations, there are a couple. You know, the most significant one is that a violation of the conditions of the zoning would be grounds theoretically to revoke the special uses that have been given. So we have conditions in our ordinances, and they state that they're conditioned upon compliance with conditions, one of which is parking, and we would have the right, if we wanted to revoke. Second is we could try to enforce fines against the restaurant or any other business whose employees are violating the ordinance. As the village ordinance, we have the right to levy fines for violations of the ordinance. Then there's what I would call, and I don't know the exact logistics of how we are registering cars and parking spots now, but would be to try to find better ways for employees to register their cars. So, and making sure that they're parking, so for example, having, that they have to get parking spaces, they have to get perhaps a sticker for their car to allow them to park in the train station parking lot. And then if we see that car parked in a spot downtown, that's not the parking lot, then that they're in violation. So that's more of a, again, working out logistics, and I just don't know how exactly it's done. But that might be those types of avenues, the best ones to allow us to more easily enforce.
Well, I apologize, Mr. Chairman, for derailing us on the parking topic. It's something I think we need more information on, but I would return it to the village to hear from the petitioner, since I think that was next in order.
Oh, that sounds good. Mr. Cole, yeah, if you could get the petitioner on board, let's proceed.
All right.
Good evening, everyone.
Yes, sir, if you could state your name for the record and your place of residence, please.
My name is John DeRosier. I own Innovasi and the other door, and my place of residence is in Chicago.
All right. If you could, please provide us a brief overview of the petition and then go through the various factors with respect to the special use permit.
Okay. The idea of the petition is to give us flexibility within our space to have multiple different levels of concepts serving different areas of need for the community to make us more financially successful and able to grow as a company. We think that dining in the next 5 to 10 years, especially right now for the next 12 to 18 months, is going to be different than it's been historically. There also are fundamental problems with restaurants as a business, just in general, that we've always, not just us, but lots of restaurants struggle with. So our idea is to try to find a multi-pronged approach to address some of these things. And that's really the scope of what we're trying to do, is to have the flexibility to move different pieces of our space around and kind of attack our sales in different ways, and provide things that we think are lacking in the community right now, or things that maybe we think the community would appreciate in a way that they don't have right now. That's really the overall idea.
Thank you. Maybe we'll focus now on the standards for special use permits. If you could go through those 6 or 7 standards and set your positions forth, please.
Sorry, just 1 second, please. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so as far as the general standard, with the unduced adverse effect, we don't expect to have any adverse effects on our adjacent properties. We're not expected to increase long-term traffic. We'll get to the parking part in just a second. But we're certainly not going to change the exterior of the building. We're going to leave everything kind of the way that it is and make everything look in a similar fashion. And we hope that the different things that we're providing within the same space gives different members of the community reasons to visit the restaurant or to visit the retail store. Certainly the bar we want to build on our lower level is going to be a different feel and a different atmosphere than the bar is in the current restaurant. So, we have a community with different types of needs and customers that are looking for different things, and we're trying to address all that. Along that same line, we don't expect to have any interference with any kind of external construction at all. This is really all of an internal thing. We have plenty of public facilities for use inside the building, or we'll be adding them to different parts as we go through the permitting construction process. Our goal is, as far as the traffic congestion is concerned, we don't really expect to have an increase in traffic. We're actually reducing the total number of seats that our building has. There won't, seating in our restaurant, most customers spend an hour and a half to 2 hours inside the restaurant. At our full capacity, as is with the village right now, without the exterior dining, is right around, I think 125 to 130 seats. It's pretty significant. We have a lot of seats inside the restaurant. So we're actually going to reduce the total number of seats that we have now by 15 to 16 seats as proposed. So we're hopefully that will reduce it. We're not trying to handle more customers at one time in our restaurant. We're just trying to handle them differently. We're certainly not going to change any significant features. The external of the building and the way that everything looks is very important to us, as it is to our landlords and to our community. So there's really no proposed changes with anything like that. Everything that we propose so far, and as we move through the permitting process, we'll comply with all the different zoning requirements. Also, obviously, all the fire, health, and safety things we have to worry about that we're adding our basement area. And generally, we feel that our proposed overall site plan and kind of the different avenues that we're going to have is consistent with all the regulations for the CBD. Is there anything more specific did you have questions on you'd like me to answer as far as those guidelines go? You can certainly talk about parking whenever you're ready.
And yes.
One of the critical issues, it seems like, from the discussion so far is impact on traffic or impact on parking. And why don't we just address that right off the bat if we could?
Sure thing. So the restaurant on a regular, normal month-to-month basis has about 30 to 32 employees. That's what we've been running at now. The only time that we get close to 40 is when we have some part-time people that help us in the summertime. But for 8.5 to 9 months out of the year, it's generally right around 30. Of those 30, 4 of them have permits to park in our private lot in back of the restaurant. And then we also have between 4 and 6 employees that either take the train or carpool when they come down. And as Glenn mentioned, we have somewhere between 20 and 25 parking permits that are active at different parts of the year. We're actually trying to find a way to renew them right now. I think we have to do it online now. But so with a combination of our own private parking, the people that ride trains and our carpool, and the permits that we have, all of our employees should be off the streets on a regular basis, with exceptions of things like people making a quick stop in the restaurant and then leaving. Or we do have guys that unload things sometimes as they're moving from place to place. Or sometimes our employees actually do visit the restaurant as customers and they eat and drink here. I am as sensitive to the parking as anybody else is. We need spaces for our customers to park. I understand when there are frustrations about when there are times that our employees are not parking where they're supposed to be. We constantly fight that battle with them, and we have procedures inside the restaurant that have been in place over the last year and a half to really start trying to make sure that we're as close to compliance as we should be. So I would like to say that our employees are not the only people that work in the CBD. There's lots of other businesses, and there are lots of other employees that work in those businesses that park on the street for hours and hours at a time. So I think that our parking issues, while we're certainly part of it, it's not, we aren't the only business that has that. I think that in general, we have lots of employees that park on the streets where we could all be making more space for our customers to come and visit our retail stores and to visit our shops and breweries and things like that.
No, thank you very much. With respect to the standards for variation, if you want to go through that real quickly, John.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I should say Mr. DeRossier did not complete, and it's not in the application, those standards for variation. We're recommending that out of really just an abundance of caution, that you reissue those for this building. If that makes sense.
So Glenn, do you need me to comment on all the different standards for that, on the different standards for variations, or is that something?
I suppose I'll leave it up to the chairman. I just, I'm sure you didn't come prepared for that, John. And, among the other things we're recommending at the staff level that you do in response to this application, we think, there's an argument to be made that you procedurally may have to reissue these parking variations that were granted in 2003. Again, so that there is a total avoidance of doubt. We think it makes sense to recommend that those be granted again.
Okay. As far as the parking variations were granted for the original building, those were granted as a site-wide plan for the building. They weren't granted only for our individual space. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's going to have to be something that our landlords would take care of, not something that that we would specifically address. We're certainly not, not equipped to handle a large-scale overview like that, like in the manner that they are.
Okay. Well, why don't we open it up for a general discussion among the commissioners? Who would like to get started? Member Burns?
I guess I'll speak up. I'm in favor of it. I think it helps to continue to make our community vibrant and meets needs. Although I am concerned about the parking, I think we've requested the applicant, along with other business owners within the community, to get the necessary amount of train station permits. I think the potential burden is more on us to enforce that. That's not within the purview of this board. I think it's the village board to come up with policies on how they want to enforce that. But I think if it's enforced across the village and across the businesses, we probably have much less of a problem. So I think I would hate to limit businesses like Mr. DeRosier is suggesting, because I think they're good for the village. I think they will bring people in. They will add revenue to our town and make it vibrant, which I'm in favor of. But I think we do need to do a better job of enforcing that the employees do across all businesses, not just yours, across the village, that they follow that. And again, that's not up to us. But in general, as it relates to the businesses and the changes that are being proposed, I'm in favor.
Thank you very much, Member Burns. Member Danley.
I'm certainly in favor of it. I think there's a real creative solution that I believe the CBD would greatly benefit from that. I think for businesses to survive right now, we do need to think out of the box, and yet you're not even thinking out of the box. You're working within your parameters of the existing building. So I applaud the creativity, as well as really looking at not expanding seating, but really looking at a common thread that's happening right now and how to stay vibrant in our community. So I'm all in favor of it. The only one thing I was concerned about was, I think in reading about it, that the fire department was a little concerned about the cachet. Is that the name?
It
or
is,
the
yeah.
lower level drinking appetizer area. And I don't know if you want to expand on that, or if you've had a conversation with the fire department.
Yeah, I can address that. So our architect is the same architect that designed the building to begin with. The space where Cachet would be located was built out as a full-blown commercial kitchen originally when the building was built. So it has plumbing, grease traps, full drains, sprinklers, fire poles, smoke detectors. It's hooked up to the same system the rest of the building is. And the basement also has multiple avenues of exit out of it. You know, we're everything that we've designed so far and everything we've gone forward and we've shown so far will meet every normal modern fire code and safety code that needs to be met. And also we're doing it in a space that was built as a kitchen. So it was built to handle a full hotline, you know, with 800,000 BTUs of equipment burning underneath it. So the space when we create it will still meet all of those codes. It'll meet all those standards. There's a letter from our architect explaining as much that we included with the packet also. And so I think on the initial, just looking at a floor plan, I can understand, you know, people questioning and wondering, is it really going to be safe to put it there? But we wouldn't ever do anything that isn't safe for our customers. We go above and beyond on a regular basis. So we would never put something or even ask to do something that would endanger anyone's life. So it will meet all regular fire codes, and we'll go through that process through the regular permitting process. But you know, we wouldn't be able to open or operate a place if it didn't meet all that kind of stuff. So it certainly will.
And if I could,
go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, if I could add, so I did speak with Bob Ruggles, who was the original architect for the property, and John DeRossier's architect, and we talked for a bit. We're hoping he might be able to jump on the call, but I would add a few notes I took from our conversation. Specifically, he said that this space was designed for the kitchen catering type of occupancy. He emphasized that, you know, for a space with an occupancy of less than 50, you're allowed to have one escape path from the tenant space, and there are currently 2 escape paths, not counting
the elevator.
Not counting the elevator, yeah. So after you go through the one door, that gets you to 2 separate stairwells that would get you up to the surface level if there was a fire. So again, that is from our conversation earlier this week.
Oh, thank you very much. Member Miller.
I too am in favor of the proposal as stated. Parking is not a new concern, it's an old concern and will continue to be a concern in this community. My question to John is, in light of the current pandemic, you anticipate in a limited amount of indoor dining that's going to be around for quite some time, maybe even up to a year. You anticipate doing this right away, or is this going to be a project going to be taken on once the pandemic is over?
No, we anticipated doing it now. We've got plans for the way that our restaurant's going to be laid out. As far as because we'll basically, for the Innovazi in the main level, we'll have a dining room that's got roughly 30 seats, and then we've got our bar, which it has, I think, 35 or 38. But that's the normal full capacity. So we're already anticipating having half that amount. Actually, it's about 45% of that capacity. Once we're allowed to have customers inside the restaurant, hopefully towards the end of this month or early next month, if we're allowed to do that. So we're planning on running the restaurant in that fashion. The retail store actually helps in that goal. We've seen a huge response for the community on the amount of wine and wine and beer that we have sold so far with the temporary licensing that the village granted to us. So that's actually the impetus for us building the retail store, is that we think that there's a real need for it. And we're going to be, we're going to build a really nice, beautifully done wine and beer shop. Right now, our agreement we've had just in broad strokes does not include liquor. Once the emergency license we have now ends, we would stop selling hard liquor and we would just focus on beer and wine. The shop will also sell cheese and charcuterie, some other small snacks, and some other items and things like that. So it will have more than just the alcohol component to it. In addition to those three areas of Innovazi, we are also going to continue with our delivery and carry-out menu that we have now, and with the other door with our delivery and carry-out menu. We've instituted that as being a permanent feature of our business. It will not be going away. So that'll be something that we continue to do even after we're all back up to kind of normal running. So our goal is to go ahead and move forward with everything now and get everything up and running now. And then we will just add more seats as we're allowed to, like any other restaurant would be able to. Cachet would not open. We're not expecting Cachet to open until August at the earliest. And again, that would open with a smaller capacity, we're assuming at that time, which is honestly completely fine. Whenever we open a restaurant, we always open at a lower capacity anyway. It gives the staff time to get working together, and it's a smarter way to open and introduce something that's that's a new concept. So every time you open a restaurant, it's like a baseball team trying to play in the playoffs on the first day of the season. So we're we open with less seats anyway. So that's we're anticipating that we're going to be running like this for a while. And we did when we actually first started. We never thought it was going to be just a couple of weeks. When we changed everything over to our catering and delivery systems, we assumed it was going to be for 2 to 3 to 4 months. So we're prepared. We are prepared for that already.
It's not less capacity; it's exclusive, right, John?
Yeah, exclusive. Yeah, that's a restaurant. That's a word we love in restaurants. Exclusive, where you have 5 people dining. It's perfect.
All right. Well, according to the village, our last parking study, we have an abundance of parking places, but in reality, I mean, we don't. And once I asked you about valet parking, and that was kiboshed right away, and there's no place to park valet unless you're talking about the train station.
Right. That's so it is possible to do valet. Obviously, it is a huge expense, and the train station is really the only place to put it, which makes the expense greater because you need an additional person to run back and forth. Also, the fact that we're taking out 35 seats from the middle of the dining room in Innovazi should make, and then the other door is the same that it was before. So our seating on this first floor is going to be less than it was before. So it should make less of a parking impact. In addition, Cachet is not going to be open every day of the week. It's just going to be Tuesday through Saturday from like, I think 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and we're planning on 9 or 10. So it's not going to be open super late. Very few customers in the suburbs drink at 11 o'clock at night. So we never come close to using our license as long as we could.
Satisfied. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Member Murray.
Mr. Chairman, I actually, I find myself this evening, having listened to the points made on both sides of the argument, in favor of delaying this discussion to the next meeting of the PCZBA. And I'm going to lay out a couple of points why I feel that way, but I'd ask my fellow commissioners' indulgence in just making a couple of comments. I mean, the first is, I think Mr. DeRossier has created something incredibly unique and valuable on the North Shore. And I just say, as a personal matter, you know, my son, his first communion party was held in what is now the other door, when that was Jean DeRossier's private room. And it was a magical moment. And it reinforces what is great about Lake Bluff. I think the other door, and with no offense intended to Innovasi, Mr. DeRossier, I think the other door is a standout on the North Shore in terms of creative use of an interesting space physically, to do something that is totally different. It's farm to table. It is consistent with the farmers market. I think it's wonderful. I applaud what Chef DeRossier has brought to Lake Bluff. But I raise a question as we sit here as a group tonight, and I've chosen to sit this evening out on the village green here during this meeting, and just watch what a wonderful thing is happening here in Lake Bluff this evening. All the restaurants here in Lake Bluff are serving patrons outside. And if anything, I think the COVID crisis has reminded all of us why, you know, dining al fresco, if we call it that, or engaging with our local places of business is so important, because it makes what is Lake Bluff a truly unique and wonderful establishment on the North Shore. But we sit here both as planning commissioners and as zoning board of appeals commissioners. And while on the zoning board of appeals, I would sit here and say that Mr. DeRossier's application makes a lot of sense. As a planning commissioner, I have bigger questions. And the questions I'd like to have a discussion with my fellow commissioners on before we vote to approve the application. And I am not saying that I would not vote for the application. What I'm saying is I'd like to have a conversation about this, is the practical implications of Mr. DeRossier opening a third place of business in a town that has a limited capability for sustainable places of entertainment and dining establishments, takeout establishments, bars, etc. And when I think about this, what I really have a question, and it is not a definitive answer, is whether as a small village, we need to effectively assume as a planning commission some obligation to ensure a level of innovation, to ensure a level of new business establishment, and to really avoid a situation under one business owner, however successful and however capable as Mr. DeRossier has proved himself to be in creating unique and really, I think, community enhancing environments, are those without end? Or is there a certain point at which this body should say that you can have one restaurant, you can have two restaurants, but to have 3 or 4 or 5 is, practically speaking, against the public interest? And this body has a fair degree of discretion in interpreting the public interest. And the question that I would ask is whether there has been sufficient debate about whether opening, in the midst of a disruption which is certainly historic in its nature, is consistent with our long-term charge. And Mr. DeRossier, while I grant you that your net math on seats that you can have is accurate, I have no reason to debate what you've said this evening is mathematically correct. I would observe that your market share as a percentage of the total seats in this village would increase to an alarming number, and where the federal government and the state government step aside, all 50 states and their federal government have antitrust standards, and they believe that it is not healthy for a community to be too dominated by any one entrepreneur or business person, however successful and however much contribution that individual may make to the community. And so, Mr. Chairman, this evening, I'm not against the proposal, but I would ask that this group consider more fully the question of whether or not we should be opening another business under the same aegis, which really increases the concentration in terms of seats that one person controls in our CBD to a point that I think is unhealthy for the community. So that's the point I'd make this evening.
Could I address a couple of those points, please?
Certainly.
I actually, Mr. Chairman, I'm speaking to my commissioners, not to the petitioner. I don't think that, I'd actually be much more interested in hearing what the fellow commissioners have to say.
No, we could address that right now, Member Murray, if you'd like. I'll just open that particular issue up for discussion. Anybody want to jump in on that, on Member Murray's concerns or his questions?
I'd actually like to hear from the village attorney, if possible. Some of the issues that Mr. Murray raised give me pause, and I'd like to understand what the village attorney might say about them.
Certainly.
So I think that the comments by Member Murray are very important comments, and one's not to be taken lightly in terms of what you all are thinking and want for your community. That said, I also have to advise you that ownership of a business, whether a business owns several businesses or one, is not really in keeping with the land use factors that are in your code, and specifically what you're focused on is how land is used. And in the relief that we're being asked about tonight is about whether it's appropriate to expand into the basement or to be able to sell liquor from a package scenario. But when we get into conversations about competition and antitrust issues, it is not one that's generally before this body and within the jurisdiction to focus on. And so I again, not to diminish, what was said and that sentiment, but I do think it gets a little afield from the factors that are before you.
Thank you, Mr. Schuster. Member Ryder, did you want to address?
Yes, that was exactly what I was wondering. To what extent is the issues that Member Murray raises within our purview? And I think that
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I need to ask the question directly. If this is going to go with what is in our purview, I think we should directly ask the village attorney if that's the question. I mean, I wanted to have, a conversation about the point. Are you saying that it is not in our purview to make a public interest decision around an application?
So I'm pulling up the standards right now, and I think that's what has to dictate what we are looking at.
I'm sorry, my point is this, which is, I think there's an elastic definition of a public interest. So I'd like to understand the definition of public interest.
One second, I just want to get to the right spot in the code.
While the village attorney is reviewing that, I
To
guess,
pick the longest section, so I apologize.
no, it's okay. I was in the middle of a sentence when Member Murray spoke just now, so to complete my thought, I am interested to know whether or not we are to consider solely the use of the land or by whom it's used in determining what is to be approved by this body. That's what I meant by purview. But I have another thing that I'd like to talk about, and that's the use of a store for beer and wine as part of the enterprise. And it hasn't struck me as something that we have a need for downtown. Perhaps I'm mistaken about that. And the place that sells wine, carry out wine now, I don't know that they're doing particularly well, nor is that necessarily our business. But I just wonder if, but for COVID, you're convinced, I guess, that this would be a going concern. I know for myself, I think everybody was interested in buying local and went to buy wine and beer and spirits from you, John, as a result of wanting to support Innovasi and all that you've done for the community, as opposed to being sort of something that we needed or desired going forward in non-COVID times. So my question mark comes regarding the retail establishment more so than another bar or restaurant in the basement.
Thank you, Member Ryder. Mr. Schuster, did you want to opine?
Sure. All right. So looking at the code, and let me unpack this a little. Are the standards for special uses. The proposed use will not have a substantial or undue adverse effect upon adjacent property, the character of the area, or public health, safety, and general welfare is the first one. And perhaps that's, what Member Murray is kind of focusing on is the general welfare, and adverse effect upon adjacent property and character of the area. Also in here, there's no interference with surrounding development, that has adequate public facilities, no traffic congestion, no destruction of significant features, general compliance with the standards of our code, and then lastly, that the proposed use will be in harmony with the general and specific purposes of this title. So while we have some general provisions that talk about public health, safety, and general welfare, and I understand the concerns about competition, the general case law on land use and zoning really focuses on the use itself. A restaurant, how, will a restaurant have adverse impacts? The ownership of it, whether it's owned by one individual or a group of owners, or if that owner happens to have other establishments, is one that's kind of goes beyond how that individual parcel will be used. And courts in Illinois have shied away from the idea of using zoning to pick winners and losers, from an economic perspective. We had this conversation, and maybe this, for those who were on this body several years ago may remember, but when Hansa Coffee wanted to come to the village, and there were many members of the public who were upset by that and brought up, well, Prairie Espresso's here, and it would be unfair for Prairie Espresso to have, or if they get driven out of town or whatnot. And the decision of this body, and one that I advised on at the time, was, again, we don't pick winners and losers with, in terms of zoning, just because one business may be economically harmed. This case I know is slightly different than that one, but it's the same principle. The focus is really on how the parcel at hand would negatively, from a physical perspective, impact the surrounding areas. And so if we, get into this idea of one owner having significant dominance of the marketplace, again, a completely valid and understandable concern, but it's one that's not really within your code purview. And I know that may be unsatisfactory, and an answer that leaves us wanting more. But again, I do think it is beyond the focus of the parcel itself and its physical use.
Thank you, Mr. Schuster. Any other discussion from the other commissioners on that particular issue?
Mr. Chairman, what I would say is that I think I understand the response of the village attorney, and I respect that. I would raise for this group the question of where the dividing line actually rests. And the reality is that there has been tremendous innovation from a core group of entrepreneurs, of which Mr. DeRosier is one. And the village, I think, should applaud what he has done. The question becomes, where do you draw the line? And where do you basically say that we need to assert as a village some semblance of restraint on the hospitality industry and where it's going to roll? And I am appreciative of the proposal that has been put forward tonight, and my expectation is it will pass, and that will add to the village. And the only question is, again, we sit every month both as a zoning board of appeals and as a planning commission. And where is the dividing line that we have to draw in this sort of circumstance? The net effect of this discussion tonight may be these permits are granted and Mr. DeRosier continues to innovate, and that will be a positive. The only question is, where does this body decide we need to weigh in on the overall development plan of the village? So with that, I will say that I am supportive of the innovation that Mr. DeRosier wants to bring to the village. I really am. It has been wonderful to date, and we're lucky to have someone who wants to bring these initiatives to the village. I'm just concerned that we have to have a plan about how this will all play out over the next 5, 10, 15 years. We don't want to wind up in a scenario where only one group controls all of our entertainment and dining options in the village, because the peculiar clarity of some of these shops that we have in the village is actually what makes Lake Bluff a wonderful place.
No, I appreciate your concerns, Member Murray. We haven't really addressed that to any great extent in the past, as best I can recall. I think one of the positives is that the petitioner is seeking to keep the footprint the same, essentially, as opposed to creating a bigger footprint throughout the village. That might be even more problematic for us. I'm not opposed to a possible continuance, but I want to make sure that the majority of the members are aligned on that path. I also want to make sure that we don't inadvertently prejudice the petitioner. So I guess, Mr. Petitioner, any specific time constraints such that would a 1-month continuance adversely impact you?
It would, because it would delay our our construction plans and materials and things we started to order and stuff like that. So am I allowed to say just 2 minutes of a couple quick points or not at this time?
No, please proceed.
Okay. So as you mentioned, I'm not trying to take over more of the village. In fact, with the exception of Bonk, which I'll address in just 1 second, this does not expand our square footage in any way. I'm just trying to find new ways to use the space that we already have. I love the fact that we have many different types of food and beverage places in our town, and each one of them approaches their own set of goals and what they do from their own perspective. And because of that, they serve different parts of the community. I know that there are people that don't come into my restaurants that go to Mabry, or there are people that go to the brewery to drink, or there are some people that just hang out in the alley with them. All those different things serve the community in a different way, and that's all a net positive. I'm certainly not looking to change any of that, and I would have no interest in that. The only space that we would be looking to actually get that's outside of our current existing lease is the Bonk space, and that is going to be about 35% of the space that we want to move into. And that entire idea initiated from trying to find a way to help the bike shop survive and stay open, because once it gets to November, everyone stops repairing bikes or buying them until May of the next year, maybe April. So that's a very difficult business that they have, that they really only have revenue consistently coming in for 6 months of the year. So that started as just our landlord and Ron, who owns part of the bike shop, and Craig and I were just talking about a way to maybe help bring in customers on a more consistent basis throughout the year, and also help pay for some of the rent. I promise I did not go looking to build a small little sandwich shop, especially now with no seats in it. It is strictly something that we're trying to do for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of the bike shop. And the fact that we took all the tables and chairs out of it, means it's going to do okay, but it's certainly not going to do the same as if customers could sit down. Like I said, I just and I have no interest in taking over more retail space in the town to do something else with food and beverage. We're just fine in the space that we have now. And as far as the retail store goes and the commercial need for a wine and beer shop, I'll just say that for 6 years we ran Wisma, and we sold an amazing amount of wine and beer out of that retail store. And while I think the initial thrust of people coming in to support the restaurant was definitely because of everything that's happening, our revenue has remained consistent for 2.5, almost 3 months now, from week to week. So I think combined with our experience before with Wisma and how much we sold there and what we're seeing so far, I do think that there is a need for it in the community, even if it's not for everyone, in the community. No business is ever going to be for everyone in a community. That's why we have a diverse group of people that do different things in this town. So, but I think the market, will tell us, over the long run, if the retail shop is a good idea, and if it's not a good idea, then we'll figure out something else. But the market will help us figure that out. The market will tell us whether they like my restaurants or don't.
No, thank you very much, John. Any other comments or discussion from the commissioners with respect to Mr. Murray's points of concern?
Okay, one thing, Chair Peters.
Certainly.
So the one last thing I guess I want to add, because I do think that Member Murray is bringing up some very important planning issues and concerns. And it's not to say that there's not a place to discuss them. It gets a little harder when you have a particular applicant before you, but as part of your role in doing comprehensive planning, or looking at your code, your zoning code, from what it says in terms of the uses that are permitted or the zoning districts and zoning lots around the CBD. There are avenues. If you think that for whatever reason things aren't firing on all cylinders, or you're not getting a diverse set of uses that you think that satisfying your planning goals. So we can look at those. You know, it's really this discussion is outside that of a particular applicant, and if you want to have that discussion, or you're looking for ideas to say what can we do differently from a code perspective or from a comprehensive plan perspective to address some of these concerns, that is completely appropriate and a conversation that you should have if you want to have it. It's just a matter of the right time and I guess tool, and it's hard when when it's a particular applicant, but again, you have opportunities if you want to do that.
No, thank you, Mr. Schuster. From my perspective, I think to some extent time is of the essence with respect to the petitioner, especially considering all the other stressors that are out there right now. I would be inclined to move forward on the petition, let the petition rise or fall on the merits, but then continue to raise, if necessary, Mr. Murray's concerns or questions going forward. Had the footprint been expanding significantly, my position or attitude might be different, but I'm inclined, barring any strong consensus from the members, to proceed with the petition on the merits.
Yeah, Chair Peters,
Yes, sir.
you never did get to me in your request for the different members to comment. Sounds like you're about ready to take a vote, so I'd like to comment first, if I may. Yeah, I'm generally in favor of the overall proposal as presented. I would certainly be concerned if the Innovasi et al. Operation was proposing a standalone retail liquor operation, liquor or retail operation for spirits or wine, beer, whatever. But that's not what's being proposed here. Member Murray, I'm just not feeling like we're even close to thinking that Innovasi et al. Is to the point where they're taking over, or anywhere close to a tipping point where they're taking over the downtown. That's just my general reaction. For us to have I'm certainly willing to talk about it at any time, but for us to have a discussion of whether there should be 4 restaurants or 5 restaurants or 6 restaurants, every restaurant is different. They're all of different sizes. They all, for the most part, serve different types of foods. And it would be extremely difficult to put any type of practical cap on what is best for the downtown, just in terms of numbers of restaurants. So I don't know where this discussion would ultimately get us. I do have one question. Glenn, were you able to identify if the proposed indoor closing times for the Innovasi operations is the same as what was just approved for the Lawrence business down the way?
Sure. So I will read those off for you. So right now, the Lawrence operation, if you would call it that, this group recommended the village board approved Monday through Friday, noon to 11 p.m., Saturday, 7 to 10, and then 2 to midnight, Sunday to 10 o'clock, and then no matter what, the outdoor dining area always closing no later than 10 o'clock. By comparison, what we are, the staff recommendation here is to match the hours of operation for Cache. I suppose I put the inflection at the end, with what's currently authorized for Innovasi. Specifically, that would be every day no later than 11 p.m. And then there's a provision there that deals with parties on New Year's Eve.
Okay, thanks. That sounds good. And the only other thing is to close the loop on my initial comment about the parking concern. and employees who, even though they may have a permit to park in the lot, I guess there's always going to be employees that are going to say, oh, there's an open spot. No one's going to say anything. Ultimately, it falls on the owner of each business in the downtown, I guess, to get some sort of cooperation on that level. There's only so much policing we can do. So I would just issue a plea that effort continue to get the employees to park over at the train parking lot.
You're absolutely right. It is no one else's responsibility besides my own, especially for our particular business because of our existing coding. So I'm the only one to take responsibility for people not doing it. So definitely not the village's problem. It's one that we created and one that we need to police ourselves.
Instead of
Thank
Pax
you.
Populi, we seek Pax Park Uli. You guys don't like Latin jokes? Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that.
Any,
So
any
I
further-
would,
Go
Mr.
ahead,
Chairman, I think that the discussion has been helpful. I would move that we approve the petitioner's application subject to the restrictions that have been proposed in terms of hours of operation. But I would also just ask whether or not the fellow commissioners would agree that there ought to be a discussion around how we guide development of the village to make sure that while successful entrepreneurs like Mr. DeRosier should be rewarded, which I think we're doing tonight, that we don't dissuade the overall environment for entrepreneurship. And I think there's a discussion to be had here about what kind of overall, kind of mix of businesses we want in the CBD. So look, I'm in favor of the applicant's proposal, but I think that the discussion is worthwhile. So I thank everyone for their patience this evening.
No, most certainly, Member Murray, and we can certainly address that issue or discussion going forward because we haven't spent a whole lot of time on the planning aspect probably since late 2019. Is there a second to Member Murray's motion?
Second.
Any further discussion? Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Certainly, once again, the order is random. Member Burns.
Aye.
Member Miller.
Aye.
Member Ryder. Miss Ryder.
Aye.
Member Murray.
Aye.
Member Danley.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. We appreciate your support. It means a lot to us.
Thank you, John. Next steps for the petitioner, Glenn.
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, part of our dive into this particular set of changes for this property is trying to restate and add clarity to some of those. I think it's 18 prior approvals that this thing has racked up since 2003. We're going to finalize that draft here in the next couple days, we believe. That'll go to the village board on Monday for first reading, and again, potentially second reading July 13th.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. All right, agenda item number 6, staff report.
Certainly. So a very short staff report tonight. I would say that happy to, if there are questions from the PCZBA about where we are or what we're doing, what's coming next, happy to answer those. I would say really just 2 points. The first is, as you've seen, here for the past few months, we haven't met due to the COVID-19 emergency. Now this is our first meeting, virtually. And as soon as we put the pieces into place to do this, the rules have changed on us once again. This has been an exercise in flexibility for all of us. I would certainly compliment Chair Peters tonight for his being flexible. I will be transparent and say that this was a little unexpected to us, that some of these changes were signed by the governor on Friday, and so we've had, as you may have heard, a little bit of technical difficulty over at Village Hall, but certainly I appreciate Chair Peters bearing with us as we here in the next few weeks will be, we believe, implementing some technical changes to make it possible for us to have these hybrid meetings. So keeping the ability to go to more of a virtual format if necessary, as the circumstances of COVID-19 dictate, or perhaps if we continue on a negative trajectory as a state, if restrictions are loosened and gatherings can become more prominent, to the extent that we can under the governor's orders, giving members of the public, giving you as commissioners opportunities to participate remotely, or if you choose to participate safely in person. As always, if there's anything we can do to help you with that, please contact me. The second thing I will note is that you might notice we have a new face up here in Hollywood Squares. John Scopoletti, I believe you all were notified by the village administrator, graduated from Northern Illinois University with his master's. He was offered and has accepted a position as a planner in Fond du Lac County up past the Cheddar Curtain in Wisconsin. So that 2.5 years flew by in a blink, went by super fast. We're really proud of John, and we're pleased with the work that he did while he was here. Miss Sam Malenik is joining us from the University of Illinois at Chicago, where she's pursuing her master's degree in planning. Sam, you want to tell the group a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm from Burr Ridge, just a southwest suburb, and I just graduated from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and in the fall, I'll be attending UIC.
Sam is well qualified for someone in her position. She previously volunteered with us at the state planning conferences that we hold every year, and so I'm really happy to have her on board. She brings many of the same talents as John, perhaps with even a bit more expertise in the work of this particular commission. I think she also has some interest in sustainability matters as well, and I'm sure you'll be seeing more of her. I would also note, perhaps something to look forward to in the future too. We had a student from Lake Forest College join us tonight. She had to leave a little bit earlier on. Her name was Allison Caskey. Whenever we know people from the public are attending as observers, I always like to recognize them. And so she's a planning student down at Lake Forest College, and you may be seeing a little bit more of her as well. Again, happy to answer any questions in the planning world, or otherwise that would conclude my report, Mr. Chairman.
What's up for next month?
Sure. So at this time, the only item hanging out there that's pending is the Jaguar dealership. They chose not to proceed during this particular meeting, and that's because, in short, getting zoning approvals online is a little bit untested. We think that these are legitimate public hearings. They provide everyone a chance to speak and to participate. They provide due process. But of course, some individuals are counseled that they should wait until they can get a normal hearing, and that is what was true for the Jaguar dealership. So they'll be waiting until they can get a more traditional experience. Aside from that,
What about the mansion on Green Bay?
Hold on one second, Elliot.
Sorry.
The Jaguar dealership, did they come before us, or was that just a workshop?
That was just a workshop.
Okay, got it. I didn't know if we had already approved, because they were going to move like, what, 3 doors down, just because they had to from a corporate design change, something like that?
Yes, and part of that would be developing the last undeveloped lot there in the industrial park, the business park.
Got it. So we've already heard this just in workshop fashion. This will be the whole full-on application when they decide. Okay.
That's correct.
What about the mansion on Green Bay?
Sure. Mr. Schuster, would you like to speak to that a little bit?
So I assume you're referring to the Stonebridge development. They withdrew their application to come before this body and then filed action against the village in court. So that is going on at the moment, and we will see how it is resolved.
What's their action? Can you say?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What was the action that they're going to the village?
They are seeking to, I mean, there's several different claims, but in essence, they're trying to rescind the zoning entitlements and the development agreement for the property.
And which leaves them where? Were they to be successful, where would they be left?
So, well, I mean, if the development agreement goes away, there would still be an ordinance on the property.
Right.
So, but I'm cautious that I don't want to say too much about the
I see.
ongoing litigation.
Of course,
So I
of
don't
course,
say
of course.
too much, but yeah, just know that that's ongoing, and we'll see how it plays out. And when there's an update that I can provide, I will be happy to do so.
Fair. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
What became of the Arden Shore 12 unit proposal? Is that on hold or did they go away?
Sure. Somewhere in between, I would say. So we were in discussions for them to submit an application. It looked like they were leading up to an application back in March before COVID. They chose not to submit at that time. They still have not submitted. We had some fee-related discussions. I believe they are still interested in the property. I know that I believe that owner has received inquiries about different development there, more in estate type development. And so you'll see that property has been listed on the MLS again. I am told that though that's development proposal is still maybe in the works. So
Thanks.
Commissioners report, or have we pretty much covered that in the staff report? Agenda item number 8 is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much. Very productive meeting considering the circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Gary.
you.
Thank you very much.
Good
Thank
job.
you much.